Chapter 6, Part 1 of Principia Ethica. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Fredrik Karlsson. Principia Ethica by G.E. Moore. Chapter 6, The Ideal. 110. The title of this chapter is ambiguous. When we call a state of things ideal, we may mean three distinct things, which have only this in common: that we always do mean to assert of the state of things in question, not only that it is good in itself, but that it is good in itself in a much higher degree than many other things. The first of these meanings of ideal is 1. That to which the phrase the ideal is most properly confined. By this is meant the best state of things conceivable, the summum bonum, the absolute good. It is in this sense that a right conception of heaven would be a right conception of the ideal. We mean by the ideal a state of things which would be absolutely perfect. But this conception may be quite clearly distinguished from a second, namely, 2. That of the best possible state of things in this world. This second conception may be identified with that which has frequently figured in philosophy as the human good, or the ultimate end towards which our action should be directed. It is in this sense that utopias are said to be ideals. The constructor of an utopia may suppose many things to be possible which are in fact impossible, but he always assumes that some things at least are rendered impossible by natural laws, and hence his construction differs essentially from one which may disregard all natural laws, however certainly established. At all events, the question, what is the best state of things which we could possibly bring about, is quite distinct from the question, what would be the best state of things conceivable. But thirdly, we may mean by calling a state of things ideal merely 3. That it is good in itself in a high degree, and it is obvious that the question what things are ideal in this sense is one which must be answered before we can pretend to settle what is the absolute or the human good. It is with the ideal in this third sense that this chapter will be principally concerned. Its main object is to arrive at some positive answer to the fundamental question of ethics, the question, what things are goods or ends in themselves? To this question we have hitherto obtained only a negative answer, the answer that pleasure is certainly not the sole good. 111. I have just said that it is upon a correct answer to this question that correct answers to the two other questions, what is the absolute good and what is the human good, must depend, and, before proceeding to discuss it, it may be well to point out the relation which it has to these two premises. 1. It is just possible that the absolute good may be entirely composed of qualities which we cannot even imagine. This is possible because, though we certainly do know a great many things that are good in themselves, and good in a high degree, yet what is best does not necessarily contain all the good things there are. That this is so follows from the principle explained in Chapter 1, to which it was there proposed that the name Principle of Organic Unities should be confined. This principle is that the intrinsic value of a whole is neither identical with nor proportional to the sum of the values of its parts. It follows from this that, though in order to obtain the greatest possible sum of values in its parts, the ideal that would necessarily contain all the things which have all these parts might not be so valuable as some other whole from which certain positive goods were omitted. But if a whole which does not contain all positive goods may yet be better than a whole which does, it follows that the best whole may be one which contains none of the positive goods with which we are acquainted. It is therefore possible that we cannot discover what the ideal is, but it is plain that, though this possibility cannot be denied, no one can have any right to assert that it is realized, that the ideal is something unimaginable. We cannot judge of the comparative values of things unless the things we judge are before our minds. We cannot therefore be entitled to assert that anything which we cannot imagine would be better than some of the things which we can, although we are also not entitled to deny the possibility that this may be the case. Consequently, our search for the ideal must be limited to a search for that one among all the wholes composed of elements known to us, which seems to be better than all the rest. We shall never be entitled to assert that this whole is perfection, but we shall be entitled to assert that it is better than any other which may be presented as a rival. But since anything which we can have any reason to think ideal must be composed of things that are known to us, it is plain that a comparative valuation of these must be our chief instrument for deciding what is ideal. The best ideal we can construct will be that state of things which contains the greatest number of things having positive value, and which contains nothing evil or indifferent, provided that the presence of none of these goods, or the absence of things evil or indifferent, seems to diminish the value of the whole. And, in fact, the chief defect of such attempts as have been made by philosophers to construct such an ideal, to describe the kingdom of heaven, seems to consist in the fact that they omit many things of very great positive value, although it is plain that this omission does not enhance the value of the whole. Where this is the case, it may be confidently asserted that the ideal proposed is not ideal. And the review of positive goods, which I am about to undertake, will, I hope, show that no ideals yet proposed are satisfactory. Great positive goods, it will appear, are so numerous that any whole which shall contain them all must be of vast complexity. To decide what is the ideal, what is the absolute best state of things imaginable, it is sufficient to condemn those ideals which are formed by omission, without any visible gain in consequence of such omission. Philosophers seem usually to have sought only for the best of single things, neglecting the fact that a whole composed of two great goods, even though one of these be obviously inferior to the other, may yet be often seen to be decidedly superior to either by itself. 2. On the other hand, utopias, attempted descriptions of a heaven upon earth, commonly suffer not only from this, but also from the opposite defect. They are commonly constructed on the principle of merely omitting the great positive evils which exist at present, with utterly inadequate regard to the goodness of what they retain. The so-called goods to which they have regard are, for the most part, things which are at best mere means to good, things such as freedom, without which possibly nothing very good can exist in this world, but which are of no value in themselves and are by no means certain even to produce anything of value. It is, of course, necessary to the purpose of their authors, whose object is merely to construct the best that may be possible in this world, that they should include, in the state of things which they describe, many things which are themselves indifferent, but which, according to natural laws, seem to be absolutely necessary for the existence of anything which is good. But, in fact, they are apt to include many things of which the necessity is by no means apparent, under the mistaken idea that these things are goods in themselves, and not merely, here and now, a means to good. While, on the other hand, they also omit from their description great positive goods, of which the attainment seems to be quite as possible as many of the changes which they recommend. That is to say, conceptions of the human good commonly err, not only, like those of the absolute good, in omitting some great goods, but also by including things indifferent, and they both omit and include in cases where the limitations of natural necessity, by the consideration of which they are legitimately differentiated from the conceptions of the absolute good, will not justify the omission and inclusion. It is, in fact, obvious that in order to decide correctly at what state of things we ought to aim, we must not only consider what results it is possible for us to obtain, but also which among equally possible results will have the greatest value. And upon this second enquiry the comparative valuation of known goods has no less important bearing than upon the investigation of the absolute good. 112. The method which must be employed in order to decide the question what things have intrinsic value and in what degrees has already been explained in chapter 3. In order to arrive at a correct decision on the first part of this question, it is necessary to consider what things are such that, if they existed by themselves in absolute isolation, we should yet judge their existence to be good, and in order to decide upon the relative degrees of value of different things, we must similarly consider what comparative value seems to attach to the isolated existence of each. By employing this method we shall guard against two errors, which seem to have been the chief causes which have vitiated previous conclusions on the subject. The first of these is 1. That which consists in supposing that what seems absolutely necessary here and now for the existence of anything good, what we cannot do without, is therefore good in itself. If we isolate such things, which are mere means to good, and suppose a world in which they alone and nothing but they existed, their intrinsic worthlessness becomes apparent. And secondly, there is the more subtle error, 2, which consists in neglecting the principle of organic unities. This error is committed when it is supposed that, if one part of a whole has no intrinsic value, the value of the whole must reside entirely in the other parts. It has in this way been commonly supposed that, if all valuable wholes could be seen to have one and only one common property, the wholes must be valuable solely because they possess this property. And the illusion is greatly strengthened if the common property in question seems, considered by itself, to have more value than the other parts of such wholes, considered by themselves. But if we consider the property in question in isolation, and then compare it with the whole of which it forms a part, it may become easily apparent that, existing by itself, the property in question has not nearly so much value as has the value to which it belongs. Thus, if we compare the value of a certain amount of pleasure, existing absolutely by itself, with the value of certain enjoyments, containing an equal amount of pleasure, it may become apparent that the enjoyment is much better than the pleasure, and also, in some cases, much worse. In such a case it is plain that the enjoyment does not owe its value solely to the pleasure it contains, although it might easily have appeared to do so when we only consider the other constituents of the enjoyment and seem to see that, without the pleasure, they would have had no value. It is now apparent, on the contrary, that the whole enjoyment owes its value quite equally to the presence of the other constituents, even though it may be true that the pleasure is the only constituent having any value by itself. And similarly, if we are told that all things owe their value solely to the fact that they are realizations of the true self, we may easily refute this statement by asking whether the predicate that is meant by realizing the true self, supposing it could exist alone, would have any value whatsoever. Either the thing which does realize the true self has intrinsic value, or it has not, and if it has, then it certainly does not owe its value solely to the fact that it realizes the true self. 113. If, now, we use this method of absolute isolation and guard against these errors, it appears that the question we have to answer is far less difficult than the controversies of ethics might have led us to expect. Indeed, once the meaning of the question is clearly understood, the answer to it, in its main outlines, appears to be so obvious that it runs the risk of seeming to be a platitude. By far the most valuable things which we know or can imagine are certain states of consciousness, which may be roughly described as the pleasures of human intercourse and the enjoyment of beautiful objects. No one, probably, who has asked himself this question has ever doubted that personal affection and the appreciation of what is beautiful in art or nature are good in themselves, nor, if we consider strictly what things are worth having purely for their own sakes, does it appear probable that any one will think that anything else has nearly so great a value as the things which are included under these two heads. I have myself urged in chapter 3 that the mere existence of what is beautiful does appear to have some intrinsic value. But I regard it as indubitable that Professor Sidgwick was so far right in the view there discussed that such mere existence of what is beautiful has value, so small as to be negligible in comparison with that which attaches to the consciousness of beauty. This simple truth may indeed be said to be universally recognized. What has not been recognized is that it is the ultimate and fundamental truth of moral philosophy, that it is only for the sake of these things, in order that as much of them as possible may at some time exist, that any one can be justified in performing any public or private duty, that they are the raison d'être of virtue, that it is they, those complex wholes themselves, and not any constituents or characteristic of them, that form the rational ultimate end of human action and the sole criterion of social progress. These appear to be truths which have been generally overlooked. That they are truths, that personal affections and aesthetic enjoyments include all the greatest, and by far the greatest, goods we can imagine, will, I hope, appear more plainly in the course of that analysis of them to which I shall now proceed. All the things which I have meant to include under the above descriptions are highly complex organic unities, and in discussing the consequences which follow from this fact, and the elements of which they are composed, I may hope at the same time both to confirm and to define my position. 114. First, I propose to begin by examining what I have called aesthetic enjoyments, since the case of personal affections presents some additional complications. It is, I think, universally admitted that the proper appreciation of a beautiful object is a good thing in itself, and my question is, what are the main elements included in such an appreciation? 1. It is plain that in those instances of aesthetic appreciation which we think most valuable, there is included not merely a bare cognition of what is beautiful in the object, but also some kind of feeling or emotion. It is not sufficient that a man should merely see the beautiful qualities in a picture and know that they are beautiful, in order that we may give his state of mind the highest praise. We require that he should also appreciate the beauty of that which he sees and which he knows to be beautiful, that he should feel and see its beauty. And by these expressions we certainly mean that he should have an appropriate emotion towards the beautiful qualities which he cognizes. It is perhaps the case that all aesthetic emotions have some common quality, but it is certain that differences in the emotion seem to be appropriate to differences in the kind of beauty perceived. And by saying that different emotions are appropriate to different kinds of beauty, we mean that the whole which is formed by the consciousness of that kind of beauty together with the emotion appropriate to it is better than if any other emotion had been felt in contemplating that particular beautiful object. Accordingly, we have a large variety of different emotions, each of which is a necessary constituent in some state of consciousness which we judge to be good. All of these emotions are essential elements in great positive goods. They are parts of organic wholes, which have great intrinsic value. But it is important to observe that these wholes are organic, and that hence it does not follow that the emotion, by itself, would have any value whatsoever, nor yet that, if it were directed to a different object, the whole thus formed might not be positively bad. And in fact it seems to be the case that if we distinguish the emotional element in any aesthetic appreciation from the cognitive element, which accompanies it and is, in fact, commonly thought of as a part of the emotion, and if we consider what value this emotional element would have, existing by itself, we can hardly think that it has any great value, even if it has any at all. Whereas, if the same emotion be directed to a different object, if, for instance, it is felt towards an object that is positively ugly, the whole state of consciousness is certainly often positively bad in a high degree. 115. 2. In the last paragraph I pointed out the two facts, that the presence of some emotion is necessary to give any very high value to a state of aesthetic appreciation, and that, on the other hand, this same emotion in itself may have little or no value. It follows that these emotions give the wholes, of which they form a part, a value far greater than which they themselves possess. The same is obviously true of the cognitive element which must be combined with these emotions in order to form these highly valuable wholes. And the present paragraph will attempt to define what is meant by this cognitive element, so far as to guard against a possible misunderstanding. When we talk of seeing a beautiful object, or, more generally, of the cognition or consciousness of a beautiful object, we may mean by these expressions something which forms no part of any valuable whole. There is an ambiguity in the use of the term object, which has probably been responsible for as many enormous errors in philosophy and psychology as any other single cause. This ambiguity may easily be detected by considering the proposition, which, though a contradiction in terms, is obviously true, that when a man sees a beautiful picture he may see nothing beautiful whatever. The ambiguity consists in the fact that by the object of vision or cognition may be meant either the qualities actually seen or all the qualities possessed by the thing seen. Thus in our case, when it is said that the picture is beautiful, it is meant that it contains qualities which are beautiful. When it is said that the man sees the picture, it is meant that he sees a great number of the qualities contained in the picture, and when it is said that, nevertheless, he sees nothing beautiful, it is meant that he does not see those qualities of the picture which are beautiful. When, therefore, I speak of the cognition of a beautiful object as an essential element in a valuable aesthetic appreciation, I must be understood to mean only the cognition of the beautiful qualities possessed by that object, and not the cognition of other qualities of the object possessing them. And this distinction must itself be carefully distinguished from the other distinction expressed above by the distinct terms seeing the beauty of a thing and seeing its beautiful qualities. By seeing the beauty of a thing we commonly mean the having an emotion towards its beautiful qualities, whereas in the seeing of its beautiful qualities we do not include any emotion. By the cognitive element, which is equally necessary with emotions to the existence of a valuable appreciation, I mean merely the actual cognition or consciousness of any or all of an object's beautiful qualities. That is to say, any or all of those elements in the object which possess any positive beauty. That such a cognitive element is essential to a valuable whole may be easily seen by asking, what value should we attribute to the proper emotion excited by hearing Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, if that emotion were entirely unaccompanied by any consciousness, either of the notes or of the melodic and harmonic relations between them? And that the mere hearing of the symphony, even accompanied by the appropriate emotion, is not sufficient, may be easily seen. if we consider what would be the state of a man who should hear all the notes but should not be aware of any of those melodic and harmonic relations which are necessary to constitute the smallest beautiful elements in the symphony. End of chapter 6, part 1.